Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Info Bloom Podcast with me, your host, Nicole. Thank you so much for coming back and listening to more of what I have to say. I am so excited to have you here and even more excited to discuss today's topic, which is all about attachment styles. This episode was inspired because I have always believed that there's a great power in knowing yourself. The relationship you have with yourself is the most important one that you will ever have to make, cultivate, develop, and invest in, because this relationship affects every other one you'll ever make. An important part of knowing yourself is knowing and understanding how you give and receive love, and your attachment style is all about the why. Why we behave the way we do when our love is not being reciprocated, or why we may even run away when it is, why we express love to others the way that we do. And today we will discuss the different attachment styles, what they look like in friendships and relationships, and how your attachment style can actually work for you rather than working against you. And so with that, let's get right into today's episode. Attachment styles is just one of those episodes and topics that I've just been wanting to discuss ever since I started my podcast. And so I honestly feel like this is the right time. And so I want to do it right by first prefacing what the main purpose of this episode is. This episode is more about introducing the idea of attachment styles and hopefully allowing you to identify what your personal attachment style is. And this can actually help you perform better in your friendships and relationships and help you, like I said earlier, build and cultivate a relationship with yourself. And so this is just a guideline, hopefully to prompt you and to encourage you to actually do the research and look deeper into what exactly your attachment style is. And so we begin with a definition of terms, as always. I'm sure you know the drill by now. And attachment styles are defined as how people relate to others based on how secure they feel. And it is essentially how a person behaves in relationships. And the interesting thing about attachment styles is that they actually form when we are babies. Attachment style theory tells us that the emotional attachments we form with our primary caregivers in infancy can influence interpersonal relationships later in life. These are the friendships and relationships that we are making now in adulthood. And I just find it so crazy that how a person behaves 20, 30, 40, 50 years later can just be pinpointed to a moment or a circumstance or situation that happened when they were children. And honestly, so many of our behavioral issues and our mental health issues at times actually stem a lot from childhood. And so I think it is so important, as I will continuously state in this episode, to know your attachment style, because it can reveal a lot of things about you in terms of how you were when you were a child. And so we will go into the 4 different types of attachment styles. So there are only about 4 attachment styles in terms of what I could find in my research and from what I know, general knowledge, I guess. I don't know if a person can fall out of any of them, like you don't find a single one that you identify to. I guess it is possible, but I think it's about seeing which one you identify with most out of the 4. So the first one is a secure attachment style. The second one is an anxious attachment style. The fourth one is an avoidant attachment style. The third one is an avoidant attachment style, and the fourth one is a disorganized attachment style. So we're just going to do a rundown of all 4 of them. And, this is the time in the episode to really put your listening ears on and try to listen to the descriptions of each of them to see which one you fall into more. So we will start with the secure attachment style. And honestly, this is the crown jewel. This is where we're all trying to be. This is the ideal attachment style for a person who is an adult. And this is characterized by feelings of trust and safety in relationships. A person with this attachment style is comfortable with intimacy. They can regulate emotions and feelings. They are good at coping and problem solving skills. They communicate effectively. They are comfortable being close and being alone. Having a secure attachment style means that you are comfortable with intimacy and you can form close relationships without significant fear of rejection or abandonment. And according to a study that was done in the 1980s, about 56% of adults have a secure attachment style, which, I mean, if this is the current stats, that's pretty good. That's more than half of people who are showing the ideal or optimal attachment style that is required for you to perform in relationships. And I think every day is a constant effort, for me at least, to just get a step closer to having this particular attachment style. And then we will go to the second one, which is an anxious attachment style. So this can also be called the preoccupied attachment style. And if you have this style, essentially, you tend to have a negative view of yourself and a positive view of others. It is marked by a deep fear of abandonment. People with this style tend to be very insecure about their relationships, often worrying that people will leave them, and thus are always hungry for validation. And so this affects 19% of of adults, according to the study that I mentioned earlier. Keep in mind, this is the 1980s. I do personally think that the percentage for this particular attachment style has gone up a little bit significantly. And so people with this attachment style are associated with feelings of neediness or being clingy. They have a fear of rejection. They are often prone to overthinking, and they often sacrifice their own needs in order to maintain relationships. And essentially, the way I understand this attachment style is that you don't feel like you're doing enough. So whether you are messaging or showing up for the person, you don't feel like you're ever doing enough for the person to validate you, and you're always thinking of ways to maybe show up for them more, or ways to be a better friend or be a better girlfriend or a better boyfriend in order for you to feel secure in the relationship. And you always feel like any validation or reassurance that you get is just not enough to remove those feelings of neediness, those feelings of fearing rejection. And so that's how I would describe this attachment style. The third one is an avoidant attachment style. So this is also called the dismissive avoidant attachment style, and it is characterized by having a discomfort with emotional intimacy, a strong desire for independence, and difficulty wholly trusting others. This one is almost opposite to the anxious attachment style because you have a positive view of yourself while having a negative view of others. So in other words, the person avoids getting close to someone, and they have discomfort with intimacy, they are inconsistent, they are hyper independent, and they are emotionally distant and unavailable. They struggle to vocalize their feelings and thoughts. And according to the study, 25% of adults have this attachment style. And so the way that I understand it is that you just feel like you'd be better off alone. As much as you might want intimacy and crave intimacy from others, it is not enough for you to put it on the line of getting hurt. So as much as like your desire for intimacy is not greater than your fear of being hurt. And so a person with this attachment style would rather be alone than put themselves in that position of trusting the wrong person or putting their heart in the hands of the wrong person. And so the fourth one, the last attachment style, is called the disorganized attachment style, and it can also be called fearful avoidant. And people with this style tend to move between traits of anxious and avoidant. And this is so interesting to me because, as we've seen from the descriptions of both of them, these are like night and day. They are so different. And so which one they are using, whether they are using anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, depends on their mood and the circumstances. So they tend to show confusing and ambiguous behaviors. Essentially, they change like the weather. They are difficult to predict how they will behave or how they will react in a certain situation. And they often struggle with identifying and regulating their emotions and tend to avoid being in strong emotional situations where they have to form a strong emotional attachment to someone due to their intense fear of getting hurt. And so these people are choosing the attachment style that will protect them the most, whether that's being anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, depending on the mood and the circumstance. And I think it can be really difficult to be in relationships or a friendship of any kind with a person who has this style because they are just unpredictable. They are as confused as you are in terms of why they are behaving the way that they are. And so I think it can be challenging to be friends with, honestly, with any of these attachment styles. If a person is displaying any of the traits of these attachment styles, I think at your worst, honestly, in terms of being avoidant or being anxious or being disorganized, you can be a very difficult person to be friends with, and it can be difficult for you to perform in relationships. And so that is why I say it's important to know which attachment style you have, because when you are showing hyper traits of being anxious attachment style or hyper traits of being avoidant, you can take a moment and stop and actually be self-aware enough to say, okay, I think right now I'm doing a bit too much. I am distancing myself from this person. I'm being avoidant, or I am being a bit too clingy, or you know what, I'm just confusing this person in general. And that self-awareness can help you in your relationships and in your friendships, because you are able to be self-aware enough to stop bad behavior when you are behaving in a way that's not so great. And although gender does not affect attachment styles, I did find interesting that in a 2018 study that was conducted, it was actually found that men usually have avoidant attachment styles while women usually have anxious attachment styles. So this is usually the case, and it shows more predominantly in romantic relationships, but I think it can also be helpful in the various friendships that you have. Being able to see why your friend is behaving a certain way. You might not even then take it personally that it's not really about you, but it's about how they show love and how they would rather receive love. But particularly in terms of romantic relationships, trauma bonds can actually form between people who have anxious attachment style and people who have avoidant attachment styles, and they happen to be in a romantic relationship. Because what it does is that the person who has an anxious attachment style is constantly playing the role of chasing. You are constantly chasing validation, constantly chasing reassurance, constantly trying to think about how you can make this person love you more, how you can make this person know that you really love them. And the person with an avoidant attachment style is just in the role of the one being chased, the one being asked for this reassurance and this constant validation. And for a person with avoidant, they already have an issue with emotional intimacy. They already having issues with trusting other people and having issues with relying on other people. And so they are constantly in the position of trying to kind of change and bend towards the needs of the person with the anxious attachment style, if that makes sense. So essentially, a person with an anxious attachment style in a relationship is constantly asking for something that a person with an avoidant attachment style can't give them. I don't know if that makes sense, but the needs that a person with an anxious attachment style needs, I don't know if a person with an avoidant can actually meet those needs, can actually provide that person with what they need. And so these relationships, they can be successful. I think so. I think if people are self-aware, like I said, and you are able to navigate these relationships with knowing what attachment style you have. But I think oftentimes the relationship ends in a pretty sad and disastrous way, because the person with the anxious attachment style will just be thinking, what could I have done more? How could I have shown this person more that I love them, or that they matter to me, and how could I have saved it, and all this overthinking, while the person with the avoidant has sacrificed that intimacy because they can't avoid being hurt. They can't put themselves in the position to be hurt. So they are putting themselves in the position of choosing their own safety and security rather than putting it on the line for the other person. So I don't know if what I've just said or explained makes sense, but I think if you have ever been in this situation, I think it makes perfect sense. And you can even explain why certain relationships have ended in the past. And that is why it is important to know your attachment styles, especially if you are going into a relationship, or even if you are in a relationship now. I think it can save many arguments and save a lot of heartache in the future, going into the relationship knowing this. But I've come up with a scenario as well that I think can more accurately describe how each attachment style would behave in a certain scenario. So the scenario is that a person hasn't texted back. Since we're talking about relationships, let's say that. So let's say your boyfriend or your girlfriend haven't texted you back all day, and they usually respond faster than that. So a person with a secure attachment style would say, you know what, it's okay. I would have rather they responded sooner, but if they are busy, that's probably why they're not messaging me, and they'll get back to me when they can. And then they move on with their day and they continue doing whatever they would have done. A person with an anxious attachment style would say, wait, Why aren't they messaging me? What are they doing that's more important? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something I said? Should I maybe send another message? Should I call? Trying to constantly think about ways to get the other person to message you back. Then a person with an avoidant attachment style would say, okay, they haven't messaged me back. This is why I don't get in relationships in the first place. This is why I don't trust people. I don't know what they're doing out there, but they're probably with someone or something. I don't even care. It's fine. You know what? If they even message me back today in the evening, I'll take 2 days to respond to them. Yeah, that's how I would imagine a person with this attachment style would respond. And then a disorganized attachment style, like we said, it honestly depends on the mood, on the circumstance. Today, they might say, why aren't they messaging me back? All these thoughts of overthinking. Then tomorrow, they might be like avoidant and say, block them. It's fine. This is why I don't trust people anyway. So a disorganized will behave dependent on how they are feeling in that moment. So it's unpredictable. They could say anything or behave in any kind of way. And yeah, so I think that scenario could just show you how each person would react. Maybe you can even see how you've reacted in the past. I'm sure we've all been in that circumstance where a person you really want to message you back is not messaging you back. And so maybe you can look back to that time and see how you responded in that situation. And that can even show you what attachment style you might have. And I think this is probably a good time to just mention which one I have. You might have been wondering throughout the episode. I don't know. But for those who were, I actually have an anxious attachment style. I knew this before I started researching the episode and decided to even do this topic today. And when I was reading the research and the information I've shared today, it just further confirmed and further just vocalized how much I am in the anxious attachment style place. And the reason why I even did this episode is because recently a situation happened where I was doing the thing. I was being needy. I was overthinking and just obsessing over something someone had done or how they had responded in a certain situation. And I was just turning it over in my mind like 1,000 times. And I literally had to stop and say, Nicole, relax. Like, you are doing way too much right now. And because I knew my attachment style, I knew that was the reason why I was behaving in that way. I was behaving in that way because what I wanted more than anything was validation or reassurance from that person that I just wasn't getting. And it just brought me into this cycle of, all these anxious thoughts. And so yeah, knowing what I know now from this episode, just that further explanation of what this attachment style has to do with shows me the things that I need to work on. Because I'm sure you've seen from the way I've been saying these things, like they're not described in the best way, in the best light, but that doesn't mean that it's not the truth. You know what I mean? If you're emotionally distant, there's no other way that we can say emotionally distant. That's just the way it is. So even though it's not being described in the best way, these are all the negative traits that are attached to these attachments. The next thing I want to talk about is why it is important. I think I've shared a bit about this throughout the episode, but just to reiterate why it's important to know your attachment style, because the way that you behave in relationships at times, it can be very frustrating when you are behaving in a way that you don't understand, because you don't know people, right? So if someone behaves in a crazy way, you're like, okay. You just kind of move on and you're like, fine. You don't know that person. But when you yourself behave in a way that you cannot predict and you can't put a reason to, it can be very frustrating and very confusing, because you don't know why you are obsessing over this person and showing all these anxious traits. You don't know why you are constantly blocking people when they show the first sign of not wanting to be with you or something. You don't know why you can't even predict the way you're gonna act, because today you might be clingy and needy, tomorrow you might be avoidant and not wanting to talk to them. Like, you are behaving in ways that you can't put a reason to, and that can be very frustrating, because as much as you might not know people around you and people on the outside, being a stranger to yourself is one of the things that will put you at odds with yourself all of the time, because you are the person you spend the most amount of time with. You are the person you you should know the best. If there's anyone whose actions you can predict, it must be you. If there's someone that you understand to the bone marrow, it must be you. And so being in a situation where you don't even understand yourself can be extremely hard, and it can be extremely frustrating, and it can negatively affect your other relationships, because how can you trust someone when you can't even trust yourself? How can you appreciate someone if you don't appreciate yourself? You see, it all comes back to that relationship, that relationship I was talking about with yourself. And so knowing your attachment style can bring you closer to that point of understanding why you are behaving a certain way and put you in a better position to act differently. And on the flip side, it can even help you understand other people. As much as you mustn't go around assigning attachment styles to people and say, hey, I think you're giving disorganized. No, we mustn't do that. But I think if a person is constantly showing signs of avoidant, you can just make an assumption, or you can conclude even for yourself moving forward in that relationship, that they lean more towards the avoidant attachment style. And that can help you interpret their behaviors, because you're no longer taking it personally. For example, if they're not messaging you back right away, you know that it's not necessarily because they don't care about you, but maybe they can be hyper independent, and so they just need time. So things like that can help you perform better in your relationships, because not only do you understand yourself, but you are in a better place to also understand somebody else. And so that's why I think it's so important to have put those listening ears on earlier in the episode. And another thing I also want to just note is that as much as you've heard all these characteristics, you might be thinking to yourself, so I'm just going to have anxious attachment style for the rest of my life. Like, that sounds crazy. And for sure, I don't think that that's the ideal for anyone. And an important thing to note is that your attachment style can change. People change all the time. Like I've said, it's the state of human beings to constantly change and evolve. And so don't think that because you show signs of one attachment style, that's your permanent state. Like, that's it for the rest of your life. Anything that wants to change, or anything that needs to change, takes time. So there are ways that you can develop yourself to maybe move closer to the ideal attachment style, which is the secure attachment style. There are lots of ways to do this. One of them is going to therapy. And guys, if I could afford therapy, I'd be there every day, just unburdening myself, just talking it out. So if you can afford therapy, if you are in a position to do that, I think seeing a professional can especially help you. Since these things have to do with childhood, it's best in the hands of professionals who know how to deal with this. And another way that you can change your attachment style is through self-awareness. Using quizzes and doing research for yourself, like I said, to really see which attachment style you fall into, because knowing its traits can help you identify them as they come up. Like I said, I was in a situation where I was showing the traits, and I was able to actually be self-aware enough to stop and change my behavior in that moment. And so growing in self-awareness, like listening to podcasts, doing research, looking at quizzes, even reading books about it, can help you understand yourself better in order for you to change, because you can't change if you don't know what needs to be changed. Let me say it again. You can't change if you don't know what needs to be changed. And like I said, I hope this starts you on a journey of understanding yourself better, of building that relationship with yourself, or falling in love with yourself again if you aren't already, and just starting you on this journey of understanding attachment styles and developing yourself more and more, because that is what we are about on this podcast, about getting better, about growing and glowing. And with that, we've actually come to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for making it this far. I mean, I hope enough of what I said has made sense for you to come back and listen to another episode. Please do leave a comment about what you thought about today's episode, what attachment style you feel like you have in the comment section of whatever listening platform you are listening on, or even on my Instagram page or YouTube, both called Info Bloom Podcast with Nicole. And with that, we have come to the very, very end of today's episode. Stay growing, stay glowing, and as always, stay blessed. I'll catch you in the next episode.